preparing your core essay, let's start with the textual integrity essay and think about how you're going to structure it. So the introduction is very similar to every other introduction. You name the text, you think about the year it was published and put that in brackets after it. You indicate genre, text type and composer of the text. Sometimes you want to be a little bit more emphatic about the genre, so you might give a little bit more detail about that than usual. Include relevant context, so the era it was made in and whether or not it's considered a classic text. Give a brief plot and theme outline in no more than half a sentence. So particularly with this module, you get used to finding what are the buzzword keywords. So particular phrases like Jacobean, Renaissance, revenge, tragedy, all those sorts of things. And you can usually give a pretty good idea and outline of what you're talking about with just a handful of keywords. Signpost the main textual integrity elements, which will be your topic sentences. So you're going to talk about language, iambic pentameter, dramatic characterisation, dramatic irony, camera shots or themes. So you should be quite specific about that and introduce them in order. Address the question using some keywords from the question and your thesis to answer it. Your thesis should justify why you can consider this text a classic. Keep in mind with the keywords that some teachers will tell you to come up with a synonym for the keyword and not to use it directly. That's probably not a good idea in something as specific as Module B. So you want to use exactly the word from the question and make sure that it's really clear to everyone exactly what you're talking about. If you're using critics' readings, you don't need to include them as though they were an additional material in the introduction. You do what we call in-text referencing. So when you get to the part that you want to talk about critics, you'll bring up the name of the critic, the date that the critic's essay was written, and the name of the essay if it has a name, and then you'll provide the quote from them. But you can just do that in the body of the text, you don't need to do it in the introduction. The first body paragraph. So this is again where critical and close studies gets a little bit different from the other essays that you've looked at. In the first body paragraph, it's not just like part of your argument, it usually sets the stage for what you're going to talk about. So it's almost like a second introduction in a way, only you will be doing state explain support throughout the first paragraph. So this paragraph might fulfill a variety of functions. If you're doing a suite of poetry, you might spend the first paragraph discussing the poetry suite as a whole. So if you're looking at Gwen Harwood, you might be talking about what all of her poetry reflects. Or if you're looking at Kenneth Slessor, you might be thinking about modernism and how that impacted him and the fact that he's a unique Australian modernist. So you might say a little bit about that. A little bit of history or context might encroach on this particular paragraph. You're going to talk about the techniques or themes which are universally used by these poets and think about their style. So if we were talking about Gwen Harwood, we might talk about things like natural imagery, cycles of life and death, an emphasis on music. So you might say sort of generically a couple of the ideas that crop up in her works again and again. If you're studying a classic text, productions and appropriations, you want to spend the first paragraph focusing on the structure and language techniques of the original text. So if you're doing, say, Hamlet, and you're going to talk about different appropriations of it, before you go there, you want to spend some time really talking about that original text. And because when you're looking at productions and appropriations, language is so important, it's probably good to really study the original language of the text. So yeah, make sure you use plenty of original quotes. Don't just sort of give us an overview of the text and then move into the productions and appropriations. They really don't like that. So if neither of those kinds of first paragraphs suit what you're writing about, you should spend the first paragraph speaking broadly about the text, commenting on its importance or influence on history and culture. So where does it fit? How did it influence people? How did people respond to it? These sorts of questions might be answered in your first paragraph. It's also good to discuss genre or text type conventions here. So you may wish to start talking about the 5-act structure if you're doing a Shakespeare, or you might discuss genre and think about how those conventions are used or not used particularly in your text. Regardless of which method suits your text, don't neglect to state explain support. So in this first paragraph, every idea that you come up with should be supported by textual evidence. So again, you should always be referencing your text. So because it is a little bit like an introduction, there's a tendency to talk about the text, but not to actually quote from the text. Try and avoid that tendency. In ordering your paragraphs as a general rule, you're going to move from the broad to the specific. So you have to think about the major ideas in the text, so the main characters, the major themes, the major arc of the structure, but then you're going to focus in on some very narrow ideas and have a really close focus. So try and make sure that you move in a logical, smooth way from the broad to the specific. In the other body paragraphs, each of the structural aspects that you signposted in the introduction is now going to get its own paragraph in order. So if you talked about structure, language, character, relationship, and theme, then you're going to do it in that order. When choosing structural aspects, don't talk about everything and don't talk about things if you have no idea what to say about them. Saying it has a structure is not interesting. You want to say it has a 5-act structure because it intensifies the sense of tragedy or something like that. So pick the most important or unusual aspects responsible for making it a classic. Yes, it's using iambic pentameter maybe, but why is it doing it and what special effect does it have? What effects do dramatic technique have? Why has the setting been put like this in a particular modern play? So make sure you're not just saying it is like that, you're saying why it is like that. In your topic sentence, explain very clearly what the aspect you're discussing is and outline what is important or unusual about it. Give 2 or 3 good examples of this aspect at work in the text via State Explain support. And don't forget to mention the techniques along with the quotes. Point out what this aspect achieves, so good characterization might make the audience personally connect to the text. Be sure to point out any inverted genre conventions or the impacts of context on this aspect, or any special text type techniques. So if you're doing a film, you know you have to talk about things like camera angles, camera shots, and diegetic sound. Make commentary about how important this aspect is to the text's success. If you could take it away and nothing would change, well then why are you talking about it in the first place? So it has to be something really important to making the text interesting or making it stand the test of time. In your conclusion sentence, use keywords from the question and reiterate your thesis. And in the conclusion, you want to use the keywords from the question again and your thesis so that you've really answered the question and talked about why the text might be considered a classic or why it might stand the test of time. State how well structured the text is, and of course if it focuses on textual integrity or universality, you want to address those ideas as well. Explain the importance of your text as an example of its text type or genre. So remember, all of these texts were chosen for a reason. They were obviously standouts in their category, so you want to show that you understand this. Explain what important message it has for the audience. So I mean, there may be many themes in your text, but what's the major, from your point of view, most important theme that the text has to offer? Give a mature comment on the value of the text or of this strong message for society. And always when you finish your conclusions, you want to leave your marker with something deep to think about. So you want them to go, that was really well phrased and really eloquent. What a mature student. That should be the last thing they think about you when they finish your essay.